Good morning, members. If I can draw this meeting to order, it's now 10 a.m. So I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public or press who have joined us today, either in person or watching via the live stream, to this meeting of the Environment and Green Investment Committee at Newshire Hall in Alconbury. The council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. May I ask, though, that everyone present turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. The closest fire escape is through the middle doors on my left. Item 1 is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. So would the Democratic Services Officer please report any apologies for absence?
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillor Corney with Councillor Goldsack substituting, and apologies from Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much indeed. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? None. Thank you very much. Item 2 is to approve the minutes for the meeting held on the 11th of July 2024 as a correct record. May I ask whether any member disagrees with the accuracy of the minutes? I see no objections, so we will take those minutes as carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Attached to the minutes is an action log, and I'm going to ask the officer whether there are any updates to that, please.
Thank you, Chair. We have updates in relation to Minute 188, Cambridgeshire's Policy and Protocol for Enforcement Action under the Land Drainage Act 1991. The action is now complete as a standard informative, is now included on our planning responses advising that the developer must ensure appropriate remediation of surface water drainage and that water courses have been appropriately maintained. The exact wording will be provided in the updated action log to be circulated. We have updates in relation to Minute 189, the East Park Energy Solar Farm proposal. Part of the action is now complete, as elected members have been invited to attend one of 3 briefing sessions put on by the developer. As for the briefing note on the difference between transmission and distribution networks, officers are finalizing this to be circulated imminently. And finally, in relation to Minute 190, Place and Sustainability Risk Register, this action is deemed complete as the implementation of Schedule 3 has been put on hold by the new government. Therefore, this will be added to our horizon scanning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members? Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. I just want on item 210, which is the agenda plan, training plan and appointments to outside bodies. I just wanted to, there had been a query about the dates of the appointment to the Conservators of the River Cam, and the officers undertook to correct it. And I just wanted to clarify, because I've just clarified it just now, that my appointment to the Conservators of the Cam runs until 31st of December 2025. Just for clarification, in case you hadn't been able to pin it down. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other issues with the action log, please? No? Okay, thank you very much. We're therefore asked to note the action log, and I'll take that as noted. Item 3 is petitions and public questions, and I'm told we have received no petitions or public questions. So we'll move on to item 4, which is the Climate Change and Environment Strategy Progress Report and Annual Carbon Footprint 2023 to 24. This is a key decision and will be presented by a full house of Cheryl French, Assistant Director, Climate Change and Energy, Emily Bolton, Climate Crisis Strategy Manager, and Sarah Wilkinson, Carbon and Energy Manager. So take it away, ladies, please.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. So today I'm pleased to present a progress report on the Climate Change and Environment Strategy and the delivery of its targets. Just to recap, the Council's Climate Change and Environment Strategy covers 3 themes: mitigation, so reducing carbon emissions; adaptation, so managing risk of climate impacts, and natural capital, which is improving biodiversity and nature. And there are 7 targets guiding these themes in the strategy. So to mobilise delivery, a just transition funding of 4.78 million has been allocated across the themes to build the Council's capacity, knowledge and skills to enable and support the scale and pace of delivery of the Council's targets and strategic ambitions for 2030 and 2045. So progress is monitored and reported annually through the annual carbon footprint report, along with an assessment of the delivery of the Council's action plan. The carbon footprint is a data-driven approach in its 6th year, and each year Sarah, her team and colleagues in Policy and Insights are improving the quality and sources of data. The risk assessment is in its 2nd year, and Emily is improving and refining our approach. However, both monitoring processes are taking a backward look to inform our position. This year, we have been collaborating with the Policy and Insights team on an approach that includes the setting of annual carbon milestones to promote forward planning. This was recommended by an internal audit report, and the detail is in section 6. We've included carbon quotas for organisational emissions, which is scopes 1, 2 and 3, to inform the setting of annual milestones, and we look forward to taking your questions on this. Initially, we are seeking to set annual milestones for carbon, but as the climate and environment work evolves, it will look to include biodiversity and adaptation milestones to aid future resource planning and management and to help achieve delivery of our targets. So I'm now going to quickly outline some headlines for you, which are in the report, because I do appreciate that it is a long report with a lot of annexes. So on carbon emission reductions, we're pleased to report a 42% reduction of carbon emissions from our 2018-19 baseline for the Council's direct emissions, which is including buildings, fleet and purchased energy, scope 1 and 2. And if you look at figure 1, which is on page 25 of your agenda pack, which hopefully you've got in front of you, this highlights the actual emission reductions achieved up to 23-24 and provides a forecast of emission reductions to 26-27 based on known investments. After 26-27, we plateau out because the business planning work hasn't yet progressed in those areas. I also want to bring your attention to figure 2, which is on page 27 of your pack. This shows the actual difference the Council has made through its own policy-making powers, investments and initiatives to reduce carbon emissions. If you compare this to the national position, which is the policy position, and in that graph, you'll see there's a black line, which is the national policy position, and the orange line is the trajectory that we've been moving on through the policy-making powers in the local authority. So, for example, the replacement of fossil fuel heating systems with low carbon heating solutions for 25 council buildings delivered through property colleagues and Sarah's team has helped deliver that 42% reduction. We're also reporting a 39% reduction on scope 3 emissions from its baseline for goods and services delivered by third-party actors working for the council. Sarah and colleagues have promoted or provided a comprehensive report in Appendix 1 describing the emissions, and I'm sure Sarah looks forward to your detailed questions on that. Sorry, Sarah. Some highlights that support this reduction, which both Sarah and Emily have worked on with colleagues, including advising on carbon for construction and highways projects, carbon reductions for construction and highways projects, developing new guidance, including the Net Zero by Design guidance, carbon calculators, and sustainable travel guidance for staff. Highways have reduced over 702 tonnes of carbon emissions last year using recycled aggregates, warm asphalt, and other measures. However, it is important to note the sensitivity of scope 3 emissions.
I think we may need to swap microphones. We can.
It might have run out. Okay, this is it. Don't worry, I haven't got too much long to go, everybody. So growth pressures, construction of new infrastructure, e.g. schools, will impact emissions. And in figure 6, we've provided you a waterfall diagram on page 31, which shows the precautionary approach we're taking, building growth assumptions into our forecasts. In 2022, we have seen a 3% reduction in area-based emissions for Cambridgeshire. Emily and I can update you on some strategic projects with partners on local area energy planning and locally determined contributions that will enable and support future emission reductions over time should you require it. In section 5, since our 2023 risk report, we can report positive progress in delivering 4 out of our 7 target areas. Figure 4 on page 29 shows you the key risk reduction that we have managed to achieve. The aim is over the next 6 years to get to the bottom left of the risk matrix and into green by 2030. For those areas we can't yet demonstrate positive impact, there are actions and facilitating works underway which we expect to provide positive progress during the next year. For example, the Trees and Woodland Strategy and Biodiversity Strategy will come forward early next year, supporting targets 1 and 4, and a comprehensive climate risk assessment on services for target 7. It's worth highlighting here the scale of organisational training and learning that has been achieved through Emily and the L&D partners, which is set out in section 3.1. We've had 3,468 staff have undertaken climate e-learning. We've had 393 staff of P4 and above trained for a whole day in carbon literacy. And we've also had 467 staff undertaking what their role is in delivery on net zero. And I think that's a key achievement. In section 7, we've highlighted proposed amendments to a couple of targets and an interim milestone. This includes bringing targets 5 and 6 together, which are the area-based emission targets, into one, as one is a subset of the other. In addition, as a result of consultancy work undertaken during the last year on our rural estate, we now know a lot more than we did previously on the carbon baseline for that rural estate. Emissions from the rural estate are significant, and it is proposed to separate out the rural estate emissions from the current Scope 3 emissions to do more work on what is possible to deliver in terms of emission reductions, balancing this with other needs such as food production. So 2 final points. At the previous committee in July, a question was asked by David Green to committee to consider the adoption of 100% plant-based food. We've provided a response to Darren, and we have also met with him. And what we have done is included an action in the action plan to review food for internal events as part of the action plan to be able to address this issue. So finally, in conclusion, this report is made possible by the work and inputs of many colleagues and teams supporting this work across the council services. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Indeed. Yeah, I'm about to come to that. Do members have any questions for the officers? Councillor Count.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation and paper, Cheryl. It's an excellent piece of work showing the progress and how to understand it. I want to understand a little bit more about the construction, the element. So you're very clear that the only way to reduce the carbon footprint is to reduce the amount of buildings and reduce the amount of highways being built, and that is covered on page 30, where it says to achieve this is very dependent on maintaining reduced levels of construction, mainly across education highways. Obviously, that has an impact. We've seen schools not being built, which has an impact on transporting children miles away from their area, and also not building highways having a massive impact on congestion. So there's a tension between the two. So I understand why this is looking at through this lens, and I heard the bit you were talking about highways, talking about different use of asphalt through another lens. But what I'd really like to see, I don't know if this is possible, is if you look at the construction that we're planning for the future and could give us a breakdown of sort of whether it's highways, whether it's schools, whether it's buildings, and then the elements within that are causing so much harm, and whether there are possibilities elsewhere of changing that. So there's that one question for you. What is it about construction that is doing the most damage to the CO2? Could we get a graph on that, and perhaps different ways of thinking about it? Because some of these might not be stop building. Some of these might be actually you need a little bit more money to use a different material that is slightly, well, it might be exorbitant. I mean, you can't do it, or it might be slightly more money. So that's my first question. The second one is about, and this is covered, I think, mainly on the table on page 71, and it's about the maintained schools are in scope 3. Now, I understand when we're building, when we're buying paper from a stationer, they're a supplier, and therefore, how do we reduce their carbon emissions? Their scope 3, but these are maintained buildings. These are county council buildings. So I don't understand why they're in scope 3 and not scope 1 and 2. So if you could help with that, please.
Thank you for your questions. So to take one at a time, the question about construction, you're right that reduced levels of construction would, of course, be the most straightforward way of reducing the carbon footprint. And that's something which we see over the years as construction has gone up and down, it has affected the carbon footprint. There are other ways to reduce the carbon footprint of construction as well. You're never going to get it to zero unless you don't build anything, but there are ways of reducing the carbon footprint of construction, such as looking at recycled and reclaimed materials rather than new materials, looking at different sorts of materials, more use of sustainable timber, and less use of carbon intensive materials like steel, concrete and asphalt. So those are all things to look at. The other thing that we are looking at is better forecasting of what our future emissions from the capital programme is likely to be. So I've been working with our capital programme board to try and that's something we're working on, to try and get better forecasting of that in future. On your question about maintained schools, why they fall into scope 3, the simple answer is because schools are responsible for their own energy contracts. They pay their own energy bills and decide who they want to be their energy supplier, which is why they fall into scope 3 under our standard definitions of the scopes. That's all it is. Thanks.
Councillor Cant, you'd like to follow up?
Yeah, thank you. I don't really feel I got an answer to question number 1, because the question number 1, I was saying, like, there's other ways of building things. Can we get some idea from you as to what that would mean, some kind of chart in the future for what we're doing? And the response was, actually, there are different ways of building things, and this is something we're considering. I'd like to know more on the subject, and I'm sure the committee members would say, not in a 2-minute summary now, but could you supply us something what that would look like for the future? The second question, which was the maintained schools. So I understand that they've got control of their budget, but then why are we sitting here and in committees saying, right, we've got a way of decarbonising that school because we're responsible for a boiler replacement? So they're not absolutely they are not directly under control, but they're also not completely indirectly under our control. And it seems to me that when we have responsibility for the maintenance of the things like the boilers, and when we've gone out, well, I mean, under the last administration, we invested £28 million in decarbonising schools, which has taken us a long way here. So why, if they're going to stay in scope 3, then actually that's not going to get us down to net zero, is it? I mean, what we've got to do, because the actual program we have at the moment will not get through the maintained schools in time. So perhaps if we could have some more information on that, if they're going to stay in scope 3. Thank you.
So
Right,
I'm just going to quickly go back to your construction question, then we'll come back to the scope 3 on schools. So I think one area just to quickly highlight is in terms of school design, we've been looking at net zero by design for schools to be able to reduce construction emissions as a starting point, because you were talking about, are there other alternative ways and alternative materials? So I think that was the starting point that we've been looking at. And I think that hopefully will come through and manage the emissions that you produce through construction. We're also working on how you reduce the emissions through the operation of a building over a lifetime, because there's the 2 parts to this story in terms of carbon emissions. And obviously that's where you're looking at ensuring that your policy position of putting in low carbon heating delivers the reductions on that second part. In terms of the scope 3 emissions on schools, so I think there was one point I was trying to think about here. The key issue is going to be policy. And at some stages, at what point is policy going to come through on building regs, which says that if you're delivering new schools, that they need to be of a certain standard? And so we all know the debate that's happening potentially in terms of standards for buildings and how that's going to impact in the future. When you're looking at retrofit, which is what we're talking about here, and saying, well, how do we support schools, maintain schools which come in under our portfolio, even though they operate it, that still is our asset. What we're looking at is to say, well, what is the long-term liability of that asset, and how do we manage that liability, and how do we manage any future carbon cost on that? And so putting together a program to be able to support that is what we're trying to do, and have been delivering, as you suggest. So I don't know if Sarah wanted to add anything else on that.
I think you've covered what I was going to say, Cheryl.
Okay.
Thanks very much. I'll also ask our executive director to come in at this point as well.
Yeah, so thank you for the questions, Councillor Count. So we can provide some further detail around plans we've got around decarbonisation in highways construction as well. So in addition to what Cheryl's outlined in terms of schools construction, so we have got quite a detailed analysis of what we could do. And I suppose your question around scope 3 it goes back to Cheryl's point around policy, that regardless of which scope the emissions are in, it's what our target and our ambition is around all of the scopes. So I think that's the key thing, is that I think we still have a policy that we want to reduce carbon in scope 3, and that's why we've provided leadership around the schools estate in the maintained sector. So it is part of our overall approach currently. Okay, thank you, Councillor Camp.
Thank you very much. I think also, given that the papers very clearly show the impact of our construction activities on our carbon footprint, and it might be that at a suitable point when we know where we're going with this and have got some more information together, that a members' seminar on that specific subject might be an interesting one for us to look at into the future. So I'll ask officers to take away and make a note of that as a potential subject for further discussion. Councillor Hathorn was next.
Yes, thank you. So yes, a very interesting and informative report as ever, a lot of stuff in there. I think the milestones approach is really good because it just seems so big and such a massive project that having a realistic milestones seems very, very sensible. I had 3 questions. One of them I think I've got my head around, the rural emissions and the emissions from the land and our rural estates. That's similar to the schools situation, because although the estate, the question, I think the question is whether I've got the correct idea. So the estate is our land, but it's operated by tenant farmers who have control. So we don't dictate what they do. That's why it's scope 3 emissions for land. It does seem like the biggest problem in this county. So separating that out as a separate piece of work is something that seems very sensible to me. The second question was a general one about staff and transport and New Shire Hall. I thought, well, I wonder how you get. I was looking at whether I could get a bus here, whatever. And if you look at the website, if you wanted to come here, it is not a website that helps you travel here by public transport. So I was wondering if we could look at that. If I want to travel now, I can plug my details in, but there is no it would be really helpful to know what bus services go to, say, St Huntingdon and Peterborough, so that you can plan a journey getting to these key destinations. I guess it's just a feeling that we talk about public transport, but actually the pragmatic reality of public transport is actually what bus do I need to catch? And I didn't find that it was a website. We are in a public facing way saying that public transport is a sensible option for here. Sorry, that's a bit long. And then the third thing was about waste. And I recognise that there is a massive bit of work going on about waste due to the legislative changes around BATC. But there was very little said in this report, and it's the emissions from waste seem to have got worse, and there's no explanation. There didn't seem to be a lot of explanation as to why, or a great deal of hope for the future, whereas I think there is a little bit of hope. So could there perhaps be some any detail added as this, I think it said draft somewhere or other.
So yeah, I can answer some of those questions. Firstly, on the rural estates. Oh, is that better? Can you hear me? There we go. So yes, on the rural estates, you're quite right that because the land is leased out to tenant farmers, that's why it falls under Scope 3 rather than Scope 1. And I think I was going.
So Emily, do you want to add something?
Pass
on
on.
transport?
Thank you. So in terms of transport, you're right, it's one of those key issues that is really challenging to deal with, and there's a lot of work going on, you know, with us and with our partners to look at that, particularly the Combined Authority with their bus reform consultation out at the moment. And I understand part of what they're looking at there is how you manage having multiple different operators in the same space and how all of those can connect up more effectively and efficiently. And so I think that's where a lot of that journey and route planning element will come through the work that the Combined Authority is doing at the moment. In terms of supporting our own staff, as Cheryl alluded to, we've recently or will soon be launching some sustainable travel guidance, which it's not rocket science, but it puts in all in one places all of the options available to colleagues when they're traveling for work, and guides through a thought process for how to work out what the best mode of travel might be for that route. You know, there are some things where actually the car is the way forward and it is the route that they need to take. For others, there are other options, particularly if you're, you know, in a position where things like cycling might be appropriate for you. So it guides you through all of those processes. But it's certainly an area that we're very cognizant of, needs looking at in the round.
On the waste thing, Frank, I think we'll probably come to you for that. I think part of the issue was obviously increased volume of waste, but I'll hand that over to you, Frank.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Chair. So in relation to waste, and the main reason why there's been an increase is because of the issue that you outlined, Councillor Haythorne, that's because of the arrangements we've got at the moment, we're having to send more waste to landfill. As part of the review that we're undertaking around the future of our waste approach, we are looking at all of the considerations, obviously clearly looking at financial and commercial considerations, but we're also looking at environmental considerations. So as part of the decision making that we will put to members, we'll also outline the environmental consideration in terms of what options we take forward. So, but all I would say is obviously that is relating to a confidential matter because we're in commercial discussions with the PFI arrangements. So there are actions that we're taking forward, and when we do have a decision, the environmental considerations, the carbon considerations will form part of that decision. And I just wanted to add in relation to what Emily said around the bus issue. So the Combined Authority is currently consulting on proposed changes around bus management, such as a proposal around franchising. If that were to be introduced, obviously that's subject to separate decision making, but that would introduce better information, as Emily's outlined. So one of the proposals is having integrated real-time information for passengers, so they can get real information around the journeys and help with journey planning, and there'll be other improvements such as integrated ticketing as well. But they're all subject to the current consultations, so we'd obviously have to see what the Combined Authority ultimately determines in relation to those proposals. Okay, thank you.
Just quickly coming back, it would be extremely helpful on the website to have something which listed the buses that come to Alconbury Weald. At the moment, if I want to travel now, I can plan my journey, but I can't really say, right, so I want to come next. I find real links to websites that allow you to do sort of real-time planning of if I want to travel now are not really the way I plan my life going forward. So just knowing what buses come to Alconbury Weald would be on the website would be really, really helpful.
Sounds a good idea. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Bradnam was next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm coming back to absolutely agree with what Councillor Hathorn said. And thank you very much for the report. Really helpful, really detailed. But I'm coming back to the emissions from agriculture, because you have said that you will bring back a report on that because it is so large and it's so difficult to quantify. And I just wondered when we might see a report on that.
Councillor Bradnam, we've obviously only recently received the report from Eunomia back in June, which was the 200,000 CO2 emissions for the rural estate. So we're now currently in discussion to say, how do we progress this? What's the dialogue we need with government? What are the new business models that we might need to look at? So there isn't a timeline right now, but I'm sure we can get you a timeline within the next couple of months.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report, and it is admirable the efforts that we are making to reduce carbon within the county. As with Councillor Hathorn and Bradnam, my attention was drawn particularly to page 80 of the report of the document pack, 42 of the report, figure 26 showing the plan and the map of the country and our contribution to carbon on a land-based. And I know that our area is very important in the production of crops, produce, etc., and that's incredibly important. However, I was just wondering whether there was any, it had been investigated in the past as to whether there was any room for the return of some of the, I mean, peat is mentioned so much within the report. It is an important factor. Whether there was any room for the return of any elements of the peatland to be returned to water to capture that carbon, as opposed to the ploughing of it, which is releasing it.
So obviously there are projects like the Great Fen, which is out by Huntingdonshire, which is looking to do that. But certainly when we're looking at this in relation to our rural estate, it's farmed. So a lot of the peat has actually also gone and been emitted. And we have knowledge now of where our highest emitters are across our different farm estates. The work that we're looking to do is to understand whether there are different farming practices that can be used potentially, and to identify if there are other ways of delivering around the peat soils. So I'm not answering your question to say, are we flooding any more peat? Because I don't think we know that yet. And so I think there's quite a lot of detail and complexity in there, which needs to be worked through.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any more questions? Councillor Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for a very good report, Cheryl and team. On page 24, target 7, right at the bottom, you state data analysis on historical Cambridgeshire floods, droughts, etc. I was wondering whether you're going to provide that sort of data to the relevant district councils, because I think we all need to work together with regard to flooding across the whole of the county. So it would be interesting to see what data you've managed to find and how that could help both district councils, local residents and everything else moving forward, so that they can protect themselves from flooding and what have you, where, you know, locally in my particular division, we have a very active flood group, and I thank you for the work that the flood team and everybody else has been doing to assist them. But it would be useful, you know, as we learn, that we make sure that that information then goes out, not only to districts, but parish councils and everybody, so that we all know how to move forward.
So there are two pieces of work that we're looking at. So internally, we're looking at or scoping.
Well, could you move the microphone closer to
sorry.
you? Thank you.
So there, oh yes, we're looking at two pieces of work. So one which is around council services and the impact of a changing climate on the ability to deliver council services. And as part of that, obviously issues like flood risk or where there is road disruption is quite key to the delivery of some of our services. So we're working with our PIP team, so Policy and Insight team, to look at historical flood events to find out what and if and where the costs were associated with that. Now, at the moment, we suspect that we won't get full costs, especially impacts on householders, but whatever we will have, of course, we'll share with districts and parish councils. On the second note, and I'm going to pass it over to Emily, there's work also collaboration with the CPCA on an area-wide climate risk work. So I'm going to pass that over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. So that area-wide piece is in the early stages of scoping at the moment, but the intention is to undertake a climate change risk assessment for the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area. And we will, of course, be working with our district councils and indeed the wider public sector partners on this piece of work, because, as you allude to, we all have stake in this, and there's no point in us all running away and doing the same thing individually. We have previously had some early discussions with all public sector partners around scoping for what we collectively think we need, and we're going to be reconvening that group shortly to further scope this project, to pin down exactly what questions we're asking and what we're going to be delving into. As you can imagine, it's quite a big, potentially a very big project to look at absolutely everything. So we're going to have to refine down to what's manageable, at least in the first instance, and then perhaps work out what new phases of work might need to look like. The intention is for this piece of work to be timed in with the Combined Authorities Climate Action Plan refresh that they're going to be undertaking over the coming months, and for this to form a key evidence base to underpin that piece of work as well.
Thank you. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again for a very comprehensive report. On page 65 of 146 on the agenda, it goes into the Unonima. I think that's how it's pronounced. A sample of the rural estate tenant farmers completed surveys. Can you tell me how big that sample was, please?
Now you're asking. I don't have that off the top of my head. I'd have to find out, but I think it's somewhere in the region of 10 to 20%. And the plan is to carry out further surveys are being carried out this winter, and such that over, I'm thinking it's nearer 20% now, because I've remembered a discussion we had, which was that over 5 years, we're hoping to gather information from all of the tenant farmers. So we do some each year. In addition to the surveys, which obviously gets more detailed information from individual farm tenants, there is also standard data that we already have for all of our farms that was taken into account.
Okay, if come back on that through you, Chair. I'm very worried about what I still think is quite a small proportion of our farm base that's been checked. They are tenants of ours, and therefore they work independently. Now, someone who's grown up and lived in this area all my life, I can tell you that Farmer A operates extremely differently to Farmer B. They could have fields right next to each other. They will do it very, very differently. So to get a whole report that we've paid an external company to come in for on a small proportion of our own rural estate brings me into question as to the validity of the actual report. That's just me doing simple maths, to be perfectly honest with you. I would have thought through our ability to speak with our tenants and everything, we could have got in excess of 80% of the feedback of what's going on in our tenants, which give us a much more accurate feeling, rather than. And the flip of that is, if a lot of this is being taken from general information, why are we paying a third-party company to do it?
So there's two things. So one is that there is a lot of part of the information does cover all of the farms, which includes what type of farming activities are carried out, the area of land, the exact geographical location, and things like that. The surveys that go out to farmers are quite detailed and time intensive. So it wouldn't have been possible to survey a large majority of the farmers in one season. So care was taken to ensure that that sample was representative as far as it could be possible. So take into account different sizes of farms, types of farms, geographical areas, things like that. And aside from that, we accept that it's not perfect, and it's not, you'll never know the exact quantities of carbon, but this is the best available data that we've ever had. So it's giving us a ballpark figure and an insight that we haven't had before. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question of clarification on what you just said. The survey that went out, was it overly time consuming for the recipient, as in the tenant? Was it overly time consuming for the officers to deal with when they come back? Or
A bit of both.
then is the survey the right one? If we
The survey is necessary in order to gather the information that's needed to produce these kinds of calculations.
We can come back to you because obviously the rural estate led this piece of work and we've supported it. So if there's some more detail you need, Councillor Goldsack, more than happy to come back and arrange discussions with the rural estate team.
I think that's a nice gesture, and I understand that. I think I'm slightly missing the point. I think my point here is more around the fact that we are measuring our entire holding. Councillor opposite said a little while ago about, could we do more? Could we do, we've watched in our area. We've watched the loss of good farmland to Sonica, and that's happened. That's gone. Okay, we need food production. We've got to keep food production going. So it's very important that we do know this. And I just want to make the point. Somewhere was the answer between 15 and 20%, hopefully pushing 20% of that. It doesn't fill me with real rich comfort that this is capturing everything that's going on, because as I say, my experience is farmers are very unique and they will work the way that they have worked.
Can I suggest we're rather getting into detail at this point, and also that the people we are asking are not the rural estate team? Can I suggest that because of the interest in how this survey was conducted and what the intention behind it was, that we ask for a note to go round to members of the committee if the team in front of us and the rural estates team could combine to just put a note together and put that round to members. I'm not sure what other purpose discussing it further here this morning could serve, and I thank Councillor Goldsack for raising the point, but I think we're now into the stage where a note to members might be helpful and might suffice to move things forward. Councillor Bradnam, you wanted to come back on something.
Thank you, Chair. I'm coming back on the data around flooding, and obviously over the last few weeks we're seeing the land's response to the enormous amount of rain that we've had in this area, just not only in recent weeks but in previous weeks, which has meant that the ground is fully saturated. But what one notices as I come from the Cambridge direction over the flood areas around the River Great Ouse, for example, is that all of that is working properly as it should. Those fields are are expected and intended to flood in order to alleviate flooding elsewhere. And so, although it looks frightening, and indeed on Friday night I came back from a council event at St Ives, and in the dark, coming over the causeway, I was very conscious that there was water on both sides of me, and that the Dolphin Hotel had its feet in water. So, there are places that are rightly and properly intended to flood in order to avoid flooding of properties. And so we know that there has been a history of us being rather good at trying to get rid of our water into the rivers, but then if that's too much for the rivers to cope with, they break their banks. So I just wanted to check, are we working with counties upstream like Bedfordshire to encourage them as well to be making good use of water meadows to prevent vast quantities of water coming into the rivers and then flooding our area downstream, which in some cases does affect properties. So I'm just wondering, are we working with our upstream neighbours to encourage a region-wide approach to flooding? Thank you.
So I can't give you the exact answer, but I can take it away to Hilary and provide you an answer. But the collaborations up and downstream on any river and any flooding are there. So we work with our partners because clearly it's been a position of water coming down from Bedford over many, many years that we've seen flooding occur and meadows being used to be able to support that. But let me come back to you on an answer. Oh, Emily's got an answer for you.
Not quite an answer, but just an addition that we are also actually Cambridge is leading an adaptation subgroup with the Regional Climate Change Forum, and that covers the whole of the East of England area. Many of our partners, as you can imagine, water, both too much and not enough at various different times, is a key talking point and something that we're trying to grapple with at the moment. So there's that other strategic forum for the climate element of all of this as well.
And we are, of course, members of the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, which looks at the whole catchment. And that has recently set up a natural environment subgroup, which is meeting as well. So there's plenty of activity at that level on between county work. So you wanted to come back, Councillor.
And just one other thing is that we're historically a county that's been good at draining our land, but actually we need to be also balancing that, as you all know, with the need to retain water that might be then treated and cleaned and used for drinking water, because otherwise we're taking water out of the catchment and using it when we could be and thank heavens we're planning to build more reservoirs, but we have a balance, don't we, between having not enough water in drought conditions and then too much when we have a lot of rain. So I hope that's all being taken into account. But thank you very much for offering to come back with a report.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson.
I was just going to make the same point about the RFCC. So that the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee includes all of the upstream counties, and we all contribute to those discussions and financially to the flood prevention through the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency is funded by the number of properties that it defends or protects from flooding, and it has to make difficult decisions. And it's a constant discussion about how we manage the river and how we manage the aging flood infrastructure, which it's going to require lots of investment, especially in the fens, to protect us. And on the pumping water, the RFCC visited the St Germans pumping station last month, and where you can see a massive facility which is basically designed to take surface water out of farmers' fields and pump it out into the Wash. And so we do pump out lots of water with massive plants. And yeah, it's a consideration. It was a big talking point in that meeting too.
I rather think we're moving into debate now. Is there any further debate that members wish to have on this paper? Councillor Count.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The point I wish to debate is I have a problem with one of the recommendations, and I think it's within your power, Chair, to rescue it without alteration. It's too late for an alteration under the new constitution, but I think by simple act you can help me get to a point where D would be acceptable. So approve the setting of annual carbon milestones. That seems very, very reasonable. I don't really have a problem with setting milestones. However, when you look at the details associated with that in section 6, and I'm going to take us to the exact bit, which is on page 33 of 146, and it is the 6.6. So the carbon quota is used to determine annual carbon reduction milestones. Milestones are adjusted annually according to performance. So, for example, if the council cannot invest financially in a year due to budget pressures, and as a result, emissions do not fall to meet the milestones, the future annual milestones change to reflect the remaining carbon quota. Now, the problem I have is realistically, what you've got is you've got a target, a milestone is a target, and when you fail to meet the target, you say, okay, we'll have a new target. I think that element is reasonable, but it's not reasonable to lose the historic targets. What you want to see over a period of time is if you are changing future targets because you failed to meet something, or you've actually improved on something where you started from. And therefore, I think you could adjust this just to say that we would include the historic targets to see how we're progressing against our original plans. To simply move the targets on their own is, in my opinion, just fiddling the figures. So I hope you'll agree to ask officers to incorporate that. If not, I would have a problem with that recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Clarity, you're not asking to a change to the wording of the recommendation, just a clarification, if that's already being planned, if that is the approach that's already being planned. There's nothing in here that I read that says we are not going to retain that historic information. But if we were going to ditch the historic information, you would be wanting officers to review that concept. But I'm not taking from this that this automatically means that we lose that historic information, and I'm very happy to ask officers to clarify what they're proposing methodologically.
Yes, thank you. It might help to clarify that the annual milestones are calculated according to a carbon quota, which is the cumulative amount of emissions that you can emit between your baseline year and your target year, so 2030 for scopes 1 and 2. So that won't change. So all that will change is the distribution between individual years.
Yeah. What I'm looking for, all right, so I understand that if the proportion will change as you move forward. What I'm looking for is on the same graph to see what you said as a county council you were going to achieve, what your milestones were. And that's what I'm looking for on the same graph. That way we can visually see that whether we are failing or beating our targets historically, and that's all I'm asking for. Now, obviously, that wasn't in the plan, but it's a simple thing. Is that something you could incorporate, and is that something you agree to, Chair? Thank you.
I'm going to ask our Executive Director to come in at this point.
Yeah, so first thing, I think the key thing in terms of setting future milestones and targets, we're trying to reconcile that with the business plan as well, so we get targets that are achievable. But as you've outlined, Councillor Count, we will continue to provide an annual report that shows actual progress against whatever the target was for any given year. So that I think the information you're asking for will be available in future reports. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Cheryl, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, it was just say supporting what Frank's saying there is if you look on figure 7 as an example, you'll see a red dotted line, which is our science-based carbon quota that's there, and also our grey line on that graph. So we're already showing you what that looks like between here and 2030. So I think we've delivered that, and we'll keep that in.
Chair, thank you. And you have, and that's a great job. But we've got a recommendation in front of us that talks about something new. And that's why I was asking for it. Do you see what I mean? The recommendation is a change. So that's why I was asking for the clarification that we're going to keep getting that. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Cheryl.
We're not doing something different, we're doing something additional. We are trying to look ahead by, rather than simply receiving a report at the end of the year that says, how did we do? What we're trying to do is add to that a piece of work that says, what do we need to do going forward? That is the point of having the milestones, which end up having to take us to the same point, because by definition, we've got to reach net zero. It's just what the shape of that looks like. And if you fail at one point, then obviously the shape of the graph is going to change over time. I'm a huge fan, as officers know, of having lots and lots of lovely detail. So I'm more than happy that's the way going forward, and that we will get that additional detail to my satisfaction, and I'm sure to yours, Councillor Count. I'm very, very happy indeed to see that additional piece of work and that extra data coming forward. Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have a contribution to the debate? No. So therefore, the recommendations in front of us are to approve the annual carbon footprint report as a record of the Council's known greenhouse gas emissions for the financial year 2023 to 24, as outlined at Appendix 1, to approve the annual climate change and environment strategy risk report for the period October 2023 to 24 at Appendix 2, to note the progress, key challenges and residual risk in delivery of the Council's climate change and environment strategy targets as outlined in section 5 of the report, to approve the setting of annual carbon milestones as in section 6, and to approve the updates to the climate change and environment targets and action plan as set out in section 7, and support the next steps set out in section 8 to continue alignment of Council action with delivery of the climate change and environment targets. Are members happy, please, to agree those recommendations? Can I see those in favour, please? Thank you very much. Those against? Those abstaining? Thank you very much, Councillor Tierney. So that is agreed by a very substantial majority. Before the officers in front of me leave us, it is important to note that this will, very sadly for us, but not for Sarah, be Sarah's last committee meeting with us, as she'll be leaving at the end of the month for an exciting new career opportunity. We're grateful for all of her work with Cambridgeshire County Council over the past 6 years and wish her all the very best in her new role. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you, Sarah, and all the very best.
Thank you very much, Councillor du Preez. That's very kind.
Thank you very much, all of you. So we'll move on then to the next item, which is the school low carbon heating project approvals, which is a key decision again, and will be presented by Chris Parkin, who is our community energy manager. And Chris is waiting in the wings.
Good morning. The report that I'm presenting today is seeking approval for council funding for 3 low carbon heating projects at Cambridgeshire schools. And those projects would be to replace end of life gas and oil boilers at those schools with air source heat pumps, and also to install solar PV and where it's not already been fitted, LED lighting in order to offset the additional electrical demand from the heat pumps. The projects are the specific schools at which the projects are Meridian Primary School in Comberton in South Cambridgeshire, St Philip's in Cambridge, and Robert Arkenstall in Haddenham in East Cambridgeshire. The funding packages that are requested for the 3 schools are in line with the criteria that were agreed by this committee in July 2021 for maintained school low carbon heating projects. But committee approval is being sought because the capital costs of these projects are in excess of the £500,000 threshold for delegated decision making. The funding package consists of across the 3 schools, a £1.07 million contribution from the council's decarbonisation fund, a £64,000 contribution from education capital from the school condition allowance budget, and £214,000 of loan funding. The decarbonisation fund contributions are affordable within the 1.85 million budget, which is available for school low carbon heating projects in the current financial year. And in addition to the council funding, these projects have external funding of £879,000 in central government grant, which will be claimed in arrears against spend incurred and have to be claimed by the end of the financial year. There's also a £101,000 capital contribution from the Diocese of Ely towards the costs at St Philip's, and a £104,000 capital contribution from the CPCA towards the costs at St Philip's as well. All of the projects are designed to deliver a bill saving to the schools, and those bill savings are designed to be large enough to enable the loan to be repaid within 15 years if the full bill saving was used for loan repayment. In practice, we schedule the loan repayments over a 20-year period, so in each year there's a small net financial benefit to the school. However, it is important to note that those projections are inherently sensitive to future gas and oil prices versus electricity prices. And if the electricity prices were higher than projected, or the fossil fuel prices were lower than projected, then those savings would be lower. Conversely, if electricity prices are lower than projected, or fossil fuel prices higher than projected, then the savings achieved will be higher than those projected in the business cases. The report also seeks approval for a project at Alderman Payne Primary School in Parsonsgrove, Fenland, only if one of the other three schools cannot proceed for some reason. And the reason for it not being included or being included only as a reserve is simply that it's not affordable to do all 4 projects within the available budget for this year from the decarbonisation fund. Investment grade proposals for those 4 schools have been presented to the schools over the past 2 weeks. I should say they're actually still draft investment grade proposals, I think in all 4 cases. However, they do include conservative allowances within the provisional cost budgets to ensure that the finalised versions of those business cases will not exceed the figures that have been presented both in this report and to the schools. Feedback from the schools, Meridian and Robert Arkenstall have both indicated that they are interested in proceeding with the projects. St Philip's have indicated that they do in principle have an interest in going forward, but they would like some more detail on sensitivity analysis to energy pricing, which I'll be providing them by the end of this week, and that they would like to discuss potential alternative positions for the air source heat pumps before they make a final decision. Alderman Payne are still considering the proposal. They wanted to make clear that they haven't rejected it, but would want to understand more detail about whether additional heat zoning control could be included into the project. And also they wanted to investigate whether they could secure some external capital contributions towards the project as well. In addition to approving funding for the 3 schools, committee's asked to note that a funding package for a project at Streatham Primary School was agreed via the urgent decision-making process. So that school's heating and hot water failed during the process of developing the investment grade proposals for the project at the school. Though that investment grade proposal was delivered in July, and there was a need for an urgent decision to allow works to commence over the summer, so that the school had heating in time for the start of the heating season. Works are now nearing completion at that school, with new meters and UKPN supply upgrades taking place tomorrow. All of the schools within, all the 3 schools within the report will require upgrades to their electrical supplies via UK Power Networks. UK Power Networks are a monopoly supplier for connection of upgraded supplies to the distribution network, and that work's referred to as non-contestable work, or the non-contestable element of a supply upgrade work. UK Power Networks are also able to, and as standard quote, for contestable elements of the work, which could alternatively be subcontracted to an independent connection provider. We are proposing and seeking committee approval to use UK Power Networks for both contestable and non-contestable elements of those works. And the reason for that is the total costs are relatively low, and there are significant additional technical risks and project management risks if we split that work between two different contractors. And those are risks that the council's not very well placed to manage, on the grounds that we don't have high voltage electrical supply expertise to ensure that compatibility of the works of two different contractors delivering a supply upgrade. That, I think, is probably it for my introduction. So very happy to attempt to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. The local members who are interested, have an interest in this paper, i.e. the local members for the schools listed, are councillors Atkins, Hunt, Simon King and Shayler. None of them are present in this room today. I don't believe any of them have indicated that they wish to make any kind of comment online or have indicated a view any other way.
No, all have been advised and none have indicated an interest to speak today.
Thank you very much indeed. So in that case, we will move on to questions, and Councillor Bradnam has indicated.
Thank you, Chair. So it's that last element. Thank you very much for your report, Chris. I support this application, but I just wanted to ask you, looking at your paragraphs 3.11 and 3.12 on page 105, absolutely, I agree that it's wise to get both the contestable and the non-contestable amounts, bits of infrastructure delivered by the same contractor. No problem with that in 3.12. But there are some elements of 3.11 that I just wanted clarification on, because you've said in 3.11 about the fact that this requires an increase in the electrical supply to the schools, and in all cases this involves upgraded cabling to the site. In some cases it also requires new substations on site or upgrades to existing UK Power Networks substations. Now, if these belong to UK Power Networks, I wanted to ask why we would be footing the bill for that, since it would seem to be their infrastructure. And the second question I wanted to ask was, I understand what you're saying in the element where you're saying the in order to avoid paying the framework contractor markup, you're prepared to pay UKPN direct. But I just wanted, my response was, is there any risk in that? I can see actually the principle is to reduce risk, but we do need to be sure that we monitor delivery and that they don't renege on it in any way that would be difficult. And that might be in terms of timing rather than in terms of actually doing it. Sorry, I'm sure UKPN wouldn't renege on it, but I just want to be clear about any risks associated, and are we actually just mitigating all those risks by paying UKPN direct? Thank you. So that's two questions.
Thank you. So the first question about why are we footing the bill, I'm afraid that is just standard practice within the distribution network operator world, that the first comer who requires an upgrade to a substation in order to supply their increased needs on site has to foot the bill for that. Of the three schools that are proposed, two of them are relatively low upgrade costs. They're in the sort of £20,000 region. One of them is at £52,000, but the other two are at the lower end because it's just cabling work that's required, essentially. In terms of risks of paying UK Power Networks direct, there is a timing risk around UK Power Networks supply upgrades in all cases, irrespective of how that work is procured. The contractors will not take on the risk of UK Power Networks not delivering on time, since they don't have control over that. So even if we were procuring through our principal contractor and they were charging us a markup on UK Power Networks costs, they would still not be taking risk on that not causing a delay and causing them additional costs for standing down their subcontractors, for example. So I don't think there's actually in practice an additional risk with paying UKPN direct. Absolutely, we have to monitor delivery carefully. Both myself and my colleague Kirsty Carmichael, who's our schools program manager, have been exchanging numerous emails this week with UK Power Networks and Siemens, who are the meter installer, regarding the UK Power Networks supply upgrades taking place at Streatham that I mentioned. And we also have another upgrade taking place tomorrow at Ridgefield as well. So that is absolutely something that we should monitor carefully and do monitor carefully.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Hathorn, you were next.
Yes, I also had a question on 3.12 and also on 3.4 about the combined authority. So in terms of the waivers, yes, it sounds very reasonable. I guess it would be helpful as a member, even if it had to be confidential for commercial reasons, whatever, to understand the value of what the waiver is for, just so that we have a handle on it sort of ongoingly. It's obviously irritating when there is a monopoly provider effectively or close to, because the risk of not going with that provider. And so just being aware of, so as a member on this committee, the energy projects we do have given me a massive insight into the complexity of changing the energy system, and that is unbelievably valuable. We are also here in a kind of relatively unique position in that we can use that knowledge to lobby government and point out to government that these issues are really, really real. So I think understanding the extent of the financial sort of exposure we have by having a waiver, and taking that knowledge and using that in our conversation with government about how we shift the way. Sorry, this has become sort of a question and a debate point. But so I guess the questions are, it would be helpful in future to have an understanding of the value of the waiver. And another question probably for the chair is, are we doing something with that knowledge of how really difficult it is to make these projects work? Because you just get, as soon as you have different providers talking to each other, there's so much risk in things getting delayed, and there's so much cost involved. It sort of, yeah, the knowledge that we get here is absolutely astonishing, and can we use that to further the conversation? Sorry. And then 3.4, we see one bit of money from the combined authority listed under St Phillips, and there's an indication there's 2 more bits of money from the combined authority. As a county councillor, can I have a bit more insight into that? And I think as a county councillor, I say, can we get more money from the combined authority? How might we do that?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of the value of the waiver, the current waiver that we're talking about for the 3 schools would be the £89,000 that's indicated in 3.11. I think your question's partly about, in future, how can councillors have visibility of that as a standard element of process? I don't have a specific answer to that, but happy to share those costs as they come through for individual projects. In terms of knowledge sharing, as I've mentioned in 3.11, we have shared the information on the costs of upgrades with the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. We've also shared it with Salix, the grant funding body who provide the PSDS grants for these projects. And we've also shared it with the Greater South East Net Zero Hub. and I think through the ADEPT meetings that Cheryl French attends. So that's been shared with other local authorities through those meetings. So that information is being shared. I don't have any feedback on what's happening with it at the moment, but I'm sure that central government are quite aware that distribution network upgrade costs are potentially barriers to delivery of low carbon heating projects. It's not an uncommon situation at all for quite high connection costs to crop up on a project. Then you asked about the CPCA funding. So the rest of the CPCA funding is for 2 schools which are under the £500,000 threshold. And they are Huntingdon Nursery and Townley. And the combined contribution from the CPCA across those is £259,000. In terms of bidding for additional CPCA funding for this year's projects, it's too late to do that in practice. The original bids, we were made aware around May time that CPCA had available funding and were interested in projects which were kind of shovel ready-ish and could be delivered this financial year, or at least start this financial year. So that was when we developed the bid for their funding contribution. I think that was only that was confirmed towards the end of August that we'd been successful in that bid. Had we had all of the investment grade proposals in an advanced state back in May, we'd have been in a position to bid for more funding probably, but we were only able to work with the best information we had at the time, which suggested that those 3 schools, Huntingdon Nursery, Townley and St Phillips, were the ones that would really need a contribution to make them viable.
Thank you. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Very clear. Very, very, very good report. Thank you. I've got a question really about understanding to make this report more information come alive, really. We've done a number of school strip outs now where we've replaced. I'm only a sub on this committee, so I may have missed it. But has there been a report of the successes of what we've done and the learnings from them that we are using for these and future projects? And also, if we have had that, or if we haven't had that, I'd like to see it. The second part of that is I'd like to see it from the school's angle as well. As in, yes, we may have reduced carbon, but there's a cost to that, to the school, where their costs of heating have gone up or whatever. So I'd be very interested in that information from what we've done.
Thank you. So the short answer is we've provided a committee report, I think in 2022, on the first year's experience with the programme. That I think really covered largely the grant application process and the early stages of implementing the first 2 projects. We haven't provided a report on operational experience for the full portfolio of 9 projects that are complete and operational. Happy to do that, although it will be a largely a for information report, which I know is not necessarily, the committee is not always necessarily the best forum for those. So happy to take a steer on how best to provide that information. We do monitor the projects on a monthly basis in terms of energy consumption. That has been quite illuminating. So we have, from that information, identified faults on a couple of projects in particular where the control systems were not correctly programmed, and there were essentially missing lines within software code, so very, very difficult to spot in advance of operation. But we were, from monthly monitoring, able to spot that consumption was too high. we were able to, from that data, demonstrate to the contractor that that was the case. They've provided compensation to those schools for the excess energy costs, and they've also gone back and rectified the software faults. In terms of learning, some of the learnings covered in section 6.33 of the report, where we talk about bringing in additional controls validation checks and standardizing remote access to metering, and ideally remote access to the building energy management system, so we can interrogate in a bit more detail to see for ourselves what's going wrong where exactly. So there's a wealth of information you can obtain by actually going into the building energy management system, looking at how each bit of plant is operating and time histories for how it's operated. Does that, I hope that answers the question. Happy to.
Yeah, if I can, through you, Chair, come back. I agree. It's probably not a presentation to this full committee, but I think a paper on the learnings and what we've done from it as an information piece, if for only to help educate us more on, not just an understanding that you are learning as you go and putting those learnings into practice, but what and how, because I'm sure I'm not the only ward member who's in constant contact with their schools and what's going on within their ward, and actually having that as an information piece would be really useful.
I'm sure we can do that. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Count.
Yeah, just what is the carbon cost per tonne saved here? What is the normal accepted measure, or the one that you can the market value, should I put it that way, of the current carbon cost per tonne? I make this £965 a tonne. Is that correct? So is it the capital cost divided by the 2,500 tonnes of savings?
That would be one way to calculate it. You could calculate it based on the council's capital contribution per tonne saved. So that's basically the decarbonisation fund contribution. The committee approval for the funding package back in July 2021, that required that the decarbonisation fund capital contribution had to be within the monetised carbon savings from the programme. We've got flexibility to over allocate on individual projects, provided that's made up by other projects. But we have to stay within that monetised carbon saving across the programme as a whole. In terms of what the value of carbon is, in terms of calculating that monetised value of the carbon saved, we use the Treasury's Green Book Greenhouse Gas Analysis Toolkit to calculate that. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly from a presentation last week that we gave to one of the schools, that the current value is about £294 per tonne of carbon. So we're pretty much fully allocated on our decarbonisation fund contribution compared to the monetised carbon savings we're projecting to deliver. So the value for money in terms of decarbonisation fund contribution is around that £294 per tonne, and within the terms that were agreed by committee in July 2021.
You've kind of lost me in the midst of that. So first of all, so let's start off. It's the total cost is £965 a tonne. The capital contribution from the council is 1 million out of 2.5 million. So I'm going to reel off a figure here. Let's say 380 a tonne. 292 was the government limit or our limit? But I understand the package as a whole offset against other ones, but on this particular one, if those figures are right, it's quite a substantial amount above that. Is the tradable value somewhere around £140 a tonne?
I don't know the answer to the UK emissions trading system current traded value for carbon. The £294 I mentioned, that is central government figure for the social cost of carbon, and that's what we use. Yes, you're absolutely right that that figure is met across the programme, so it may not be met on these 3 projects. Meridian is relatively good value in terms of its carbon savings, and that's partly because it's an oil-fired school. Robert Arkenstall and St Philip's are more challenging, and they're effectively slightly cross-subsidised by some of the other projects that are below the £500,000 threshold.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Chris? No. Move then to the debate. Is there any debate that members wish to have? Councillor Count. Indicating to speak. I did call you.
Yeah, I didn't see your acknowledgement, Chair. Okay, I'm going to struggle with this. You know, going back a few years, 2014 to 2021, we did 61 schools at no cost to the taxpayer, right? They were done in a different method, providing loans, and then the bills were repaid by the savings that the schools made, plus a margin to cover our officer time. We're standing here today, we're looking for three schools. The cost to the county council taxpayer is 1.13 million for 3 schools. The cost of the carbon saving far outstrips what is an acceptable mean, in my opinion. We had a paper 5 minutes ago that told us that scope 1 and 2 was our responsibility, and scope 3, which maintained schools fall into, are not, because they're wholly responsible for our own budgets. And I took the bit on board about we've got to maintain it. So I haven't included, so I do understand the school condition allowance. We're going to have to replace the boiler at some time, £63,956. But the £1 million decarbonisation fund, if you're going to do this here, I don't see the difference between somebody who is maintaining a school that we've been told is not under control, not our budget, and us buying from somebody else, like an IT supplier or a supplier of our stools and chairs. We're being told in one hand it's different, on the other hand it's the same, and the cost is way too high overall. These schools have the options of going to academies. We're not responsible for academies in any ways, but they haven't chosen to go that way. And here we are asking for the taxpayer for £1 million for just 2,500 carbon savings. It's a change of direction and a policy by this joint administration that has caused this. This wouldn't have happened before. I can't support this. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. I was surprised to hear that there wasn't a specific piece of work done in regards to schools that have already made a similar transition, because there are known issues with air source heat pumps, and those issues relate to the fact that they perform less well in colder temperatures. So I wonder what the effect on the schools might have been, in practice, what they will have experienced. It seems to me that between the months of, say, November and March, they may well have seen that the building was much less warm than they'd anticipated or expected or needed. And it worries me that that might lead to school absenteeism or discomfort for staff and pupils. And maybe it won't, but without doing the work and asking them, and if we did that, I think we would have to be very frank and say, can we have your honest opinions, please? Because I suspect when a lot of money is spent, people feel the need to justify sometimes. But I think frank exchanges are necessary, because we don't want to go down a path where we're ideologically forcing something upon schools or bribing them or encouraging them, if you prefer, to go down a route that is less effective for them. And obviously the other thing that is an issue with air source heat pumps is when they become less efficient, more energy costs shoot up, which might become a major issue going forwards if energy prices change. All of these things suggest to me that we do seem to be spending a lot of money rushing down an unproven route, and I can't support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hathorn.
So air source heat pumps are able to operate in cold temperatures. They're widely used on the continent where temperatures get a lot colder than here. So I dispute the notion that we're making schools colder in winter. The whole point of this is to make schools warmer, to make sure they are better insulated and that they are more pleasant environments for children. It is my understanding not that it is complicated, and I also struggled with understanding the difference between scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions within the carbon report. But for maintained schools, it's not reasonable to say they have the choice of going to an academy or not, because they have autonomy. They can choose to be your local school. It's not necessarily a point of great joy in a community when your school decides it's going to become part of an academy. It puts a lot of trust on that academy. And there are excellent academies out there, but not every resident of this county wants their local school to move away from being a maintained school and becoming an academy school. The maintained schools, we are the landlord in the same way that you would be a landlord as a rental landlord. So we look after the infrastructure, we can look after the buildings, but we allow the maintained schools effectively as tenants to choose things like their energy contracts. That is the difference. We're not saying to schools, you have to manage their own. Maintained schools who have responsibility for maintaining their own budgets, that we are going to dictate which energy provider they use or which energy contract, or whether they commit to renewable energy. So that is the difference here. And yes, it is subtle and it is complicated, but I think there is a fairly sort of sensible difference between us as a responsible landlord saying we're going to get our schools to net zero, but legislatively the schools get to make that have autonomy over what energy contracts they use, or us not being responsible.
Thank you. Councillor Bradnam was next.
Thank you. That exchange gave me pause for thought. As I said, I support this since these are maintained schools. But what I just wanted to ask for clarification on or consider is that I think once in the past we invested in air source heat pumps at a school, which shortly afterward changed to being an academy. And we decided to continue with that project to see it out. But I just wondered, are we going to set up any clawback arrangements such that the investment that we make on air source heat pumps in schools, which then shortly afterwards take the benefit of that and become an academy, they might be required to pay back some of the costs of the county council?
I think that was a question, and I'm happy to ask officers to respond to that. This has been a point of some contention. What happens if we start going down this route and a school then decides to academise? We picked up one in East Cambridgeshire a little while ago where we were on the point of signing up and the school said, oh, by the way, we are academising, at which point the academy decided it didn't want to proceed with the project, so it didn't happen. And I think that does indicate that schools do have autonomy in this. Nobody's forcing them down a particular direction. We did make the change. It was the first meeting of this committee under the joint administration. We changed the arrangements for how we funded this to try to pool money and savings from different sources to try to ensure that more schools were in scope and could choose to go down this path if they wished. And I still maintain that that was a good thing to do. But it's quite obvious that if you pick the low-hanging fruit early on, what is left is going to be more challenging and more difficult. And that was why we had to put something together to try to enable more schools to heat and light their buildings sustainably if they wish to go down that path. So that's my contribution to that, and acknowledging that academisation is an issue. On the clawback, I'm happy to go to officers for that. I suspect we would find that rather a difficult.
Yes, indeed. So as you pointed out, the school that was discussed previously by committee where we had developed a project and before delivery they decided they wanted to academise. The Academy Trust in that case said that because there wasn't a financial benefit to them in proceeding, or not a significant one, they didn't want to proceed. So that project didn't go ahead. There is a risk of academisation. However, it's rather lower than it was a year or so ago. The previous government did have a declared target for schools to join large academy trusts by 2030. That hasn't been enacted in legislation, and there's no current ambition declared by the current government along those lines. We do check on the projects prior to the projects going ahead. We check with Education Capital whether there are any plans for the schools to academise, and none of these in the current programme have plans to academise. Nevertheless, there's nothing to prevent them choosing to do so, say, in 5 years' time. Unfortunately, we don't have a mechanism for clawing back any cost in the event that they do decide to academise. It's quite a tricky thing to deal with because other than the carbon savings and a small bill saving, there isn't a significant tangible benefit to an academy trust in having a decarbonised school versus a non-decarbonised school. So there might be a significant reluctance from them to take on a school where they had a payback liability like that. I did have a couple of comments in relation to debate points on thermal comfort and carbon savings compared to the earlier reports, if it's appropriate to, yeah, okay. So Councillor Count contrasted the early energy efficiency projects delivered prior to 2021, which essentially pay for themselves, with the low carbon heating projects. One of the key points to make about those projects is the energy efficiency projects delivered up to 2021, they delivered about 16% carbon saving from the school's energy use. These projects generally deliver about 65% carbon saving. And the difference was very much the earlier projects were focused primarily on reducing electricity consumption, and the low carbon heating projects, as the title suggests, very much about decarbonising the heating, which is generally a much larger source of carbon emissions. And unfortunately, the reality is that heating is very cheap at the moment with gas and oil. Even with current gas and oil prices, it's a relatively cheap form of energy. So anything you do to decarbonise it is very challenging financially. We do know that there have been lots of calls for government to rebalance energy costs to make operation of heat pumps more financially attractive. Absolutely nothing in concrete in legislation yet to do that, but there definitely is pressure for that. On the reporting of experience from the programme, we have reported that experience to the Green Investment Utilities Advisory Group, and as discussed previously and requested by Councillor Goldsack, very happy to provide further reporting to a broader group. The thermal comfort issue, I think that's just a perception issue in all honesty. We haven't had any problems with thermal comfort in any of the school heat pump retrofits that have been delivered, at least only transitional ones whilst they balance the system. So thermal comfort hasn't been a problem. And in terms of performance, they are all currently on track in terms of energy efficiency performance of the heat pumps. So we haven't found any problems there other than those kind of transitional problems that were due to defects at installation phase that have been rectified. Thank you.
Thank you. I would also say, Councillor Count, that it is disappointing that members of your group choose not to come to the meetings of the Green Investment and Utilities Advisory Group, because we have a lot of information there and some really useful conversations. Councillor Bradnam, you wish to come back.
Thank you very much. I just want to make it clear, I know people have different views about schools becoming academies or not, and I'm making no value judgment about that at all. I just wanted to, it's a bit like your employer paying for you to get a degree, and if you then leave the employer within so many years, you're expected to pay some of that investment back. So it was more to do with the investment in a school, which was under our management responsibility, which might then suddenly change its ownership. That was all. Thank you.
Councillor Count.
First of all, Chair, apologies from Councillor Goldsack. He had to leave on a personal emergency issue. Just want to talk about more of a conceptual idea, what we're talking about here, where I stand and why I'm voting against this today. So I believe in man-made climate change. I do believe that we need to deal with this. I believe we need to get down to carbon net zero. I'm at odds with certain people about that, and I'm also aligned with certain people about that. But my position is clear. I believe in man-made climate change, and I believe we need to get down to net zero. But I think it's an international issue. It is an international issue, and we all need to do the best we can at the pace that we can. And our pace is set by the British government. The British government, the previous one, said it at 2050. I've not seen any change to that. And the reason that they said it is because of the evidence base of what could be done. Now, in achieving that, they set certain tasks to the county council. We've broken that down to scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. And it's very, very clear that we have to deal with scope 1 and 2 because that's our responsibility, our domain. And therefore, I'm quite comfortable if push comes to shove, saying to the Cambridgeshire taxpayer, actually, this is our duty. We have to do this. But when it goes into scope 3, we actually need the government to say, okay, if we want all of these buildings to be at this level, or we all want all that, we've got to provide the grant to do that because we're telling you this needs to happen. And they haven't provided the county council with any money to deal with this. They've got a grant out there at the moment, which we've accessed as part of it, but it isn't sufficient in these cases. It isn't sufficient to deliver these. And we heard earlier on in this debate, so we had to come forward with a new plan to get schools to join in. We didn't actually have to come forward with Cambridgeshire County Council residents, taxpayers' money for this. We could have said, no, we need to wait until the government grants match the needs between the energy savings at the school and what the government gives. And there's a big disparity here, and Cambridgeshire County Council is rushing forward with residents' taxpayers' money to fill that void ahead of when government is ready for that. And that is the difference here today in front of me, which is why I won't support this. So thank you for all the information. I have looked at the carbon trading value. It's about £140 a tonne at the moment. And this project is about £390 a tonne to the county taxpayer and about £950 a tonne to the entire subsidy regime. So there's just way off the mark for me. So I can't support this. My apologies, but thank you for a well-prepared and thought-through paper.
Thank you very much, Councillor Count. Councillor Coutts.
Just some clarification here, because I'm slightly confused at the turn that the debate has taken here. The proposals we're studying here, I think, do meet the criteria we set as a committee 3 years ago. So there's no change in our council policy being recommended here. Because my memory is that that policy was set in committee, and I know it's 3 years ago now, with very broad, if not universal, but broad cross-party support when that decision was taken. I don't know if my memory is at fault there. If it is, obviously I'll apologise. But if not, I don't quite understand why there's a debating point being made now when we're not actually changing the policy which we previously set. Perhaps we could be helped on that one.
I tend to agree with you, Councillor Coutts. I'm not sure that we are suggesting a change to policy. Indeed, this is very much within the scope of the arrangements that we set up 3.5 years ago, unless I'm informed otherwise. And officers, can you confirm to me that that is the case?
Chair, was that a question to me? Why am I choosing to debate this when this is current policy?
It is not the normal way in which this committee operates that we have cross-questioning of members by other members. So I'm not taking it in that spirit. Chris, do you have anything to contribute on this?
Just to confirm, absolutely, the finance package is in line with what was agreed by committee 3 years ago. To be completely transparent, though, some other external factors have changed in that time. project costs have definitely got higher in that time. We've seen that across all types of construction project. But also, again, to be completely transparent, the government's valuation of carbon has increased significantly in that time as well. So that has implications for how much decarbonisation fund can be allocated under the terms of that were agreed by committee 3 years ago. So there have been external changes as well as the committee agreement 3 years ago, which hasn't changed. We are still working consistently with that. Sorry, I hope that was clear. I'm not sure I made that very clearly.
It is helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. That was actually very clear. Do I see any other? Yes, Councillor Ferguson.
Just want to talk about heat pumps, if you don't mind. So Councillor Tierney is technically right that the performance of heat pumps does deteriorate in extreme cold weather, but of course, as I'm sure he's aware, that they're about 250% to 450% more energy efficient than gas boilers anyway. So there's quite a lot of margin for a performance deterioration until they hit the level of gas boilers are every day. I think most modern air source heat pumps will work down to temperatures of less than minus 15 degrees, which we don't often experience in Cambridgeshire. So I don't think that's really a relevant argument in this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Ray.
Just to add that the costs here include not only replacement by air source heat pumps, but also insulation and other energy saving matters. And that to really emphasize the fact that if these boilers are not replaced with air source heat pumps, they will be replaced by oil boilers or by gas boilers, which will be in place for the next 20 years.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Any other speakers? Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. Feel the urge to come back on that one. I think members in this room would do well to address what I say rather than what they imagine that I say. But nonetheless, I would point out that my issue was that I do think before we force schools down a complete change in their heating system, it would not be a bad idea to talk to the schools that have done it and see what their issues were. I think that's probably something we could all get on board with. And that's just what I propose. Thank you.
And similarly, I think the point I made was that nobody is forcing schools down this particular route. And I gave one example of a school that actually declined. And in fact, we are presented with a situation here in which one of the schools, one of the 3 schools listed might not proceed with this, in which case we have an alternative backup plan. So yes, I'm all for mutual understanding and actually listening to each other, Councillor Tierney. Any other speakers? No, in which case I will move to the vote that we agree that funding be allocated for the low carbon heating projects at Meridian, Robert Arkenstall and St Philip's Primary School, as set out in paragraph 3.6. In the event that one project cannot proceed, committee is asked to approve funding for a low carbon heating project at Alderman Payne Primary School as a reserve. To note that an urgent decision-making process was used to approve funding for a low-carbon heating project at Streatham Community Primary School for the reasons set out in paragraph 3.10. To confirm the ongoing availability of up to £214,000 as the lending facility from the Council for the schools specified in this report for low-carbon and energy efficiency projects, continuing the approach set out in paragraphs 2.1 and 2.2. And to agree the proposed use of UK Power Networks for both non-contestable and contestable elements of electrical supply upgrades, as discussed in paragraphs 3.11 and 3.12. Can I see those in favour, please? Thank you. Can I see those against? Thank you. That is clearly, though not universally, carried. Thank you very much indeed, members. And thank you, Chris, for your guidance through that matter. So we move now. Can we do this in 12 minutes, do we think? Right, okay, we're going to go for it. The Finance Monitoring Report is the next item for August, and this will be presented by Stephen Howarth, our Head of Finance. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. So this report presents the management accounts of the Place and Sustainability Directorate, and specifically the services within that directorate that are the remit of this committee at period 5 for 24-25, which is August. So on the revenue side, the Directorate overall is forecasting a revenue overspend of nearly £4 million for the year, driven mainly by two key pressures within this committee's remit. So firstly, the waste management budget continues to overspend as a result of an ongoing waste treatment plant closure due to environmental regulations and the need to make alternative, more costly arrangements for waste disposal. That's been the subject of separate reports to this committee through the year. Secondly, income from energy generation projects is forecast to be below budget for the year due to delays in energisation of schemes and reduced energy prices that we sell the generated energy for. The latter is partly mitigated through lower prices also being charged to the council for energy that we consume for our buildings and our streetlights. On capital, there are no significant variances reported on projects within the remit of the committee at this stage. This report also brings the quarterly savings tracker for the Directorate and so for services within the remit of this committee. So overall, the variance is reported on those services, mainly due to pressures on income from energy generation that I mentioned earlier. So thank you, Chair. I'll leave the introduction there.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Before we move on to discuss this item, can I just say that if questions arise that relate to confidential content, we will need to move the meeting into private session and exclude the press and public. And if that occurs, we will save those until we move into the confidential session following the final public item on the agenda. Is anybody going to want to discuss confidential matters on this report? No, that's helpful. Thank you. And I shall keep a beady eye out. Does anybody have any questions for Stephen? No questions? Councillor Bradnam?
Thank you, Chair. My eye was drawn to the significant issues on page 121, which I'll read out because it's not very often you get to see this. Highway development, control and street works income. I don't know whether members realise that when utilities are installed, our street works inspectors go out and check it's been done properly. And if it's not, they fine them. And this gives us income. So not quite like
Bradnam, I'm not sure.
So what I just wanted
Councillor Bradnam, can I please stop you? I'm in the chair. This I do not believe is within the purview of this committee. This is a highways and street works.
It's in the finance monitoring report at page 121.
Yes,
I just wanted to say,
Councillor Bradnam, I don't, unless I'm corrected by officers, I do not believe that this is a matter for this committee.
It just says
my officers tell me that it is not, Councillor Bradnam. Can you please confine yourself to matters that were in the purview of this committee?
I refer you to the last sentence on page 121.
Councillor Bradnam, thank you. I will move
Sorry,
on.
I
Any
apologise if I've-
other speakers, please? No other speakers? We're moving on to debate. I didn't see any appetite for questions. Councillor Count.
Thank you, Chair. I'd have been interested to hear what was said, but hopefully I'll be on the right track when I move to page 117. I just want to draw everybody's attention to 3.4. The budget for the Babraham Park and Ride Energy Grid will be increased by 233,000 to reflect an agreed commercial settlement. It doesn't require a recommendation because it's within officer delegation limits, but it's just another increase on top of so many. I was talking earlier on about the historic context being there for milestones in the carbon savings, so we can see failures at future points in time. And I think that this committee must acknowledge that the delivery of these projects that were taken over in 2021 have become increasingly vexatious to us all as money just gets added on and added on and added on. And here we are, page 117, only worthy of a single line report, another £230,000 just written off like that of taxpayers' money. There's something horribly, horribly wrong.
There certainly is. It's called the way in which these projects were set up and delivered to us. It's called war. It's called the Liz Truss budget. It's called Brexit, and all of those factors that have totally transformed the environment in which we're working. Thank you. Any other contributions to the debate? Councillor Hathorn.
Yes, I'd like to add on that note. This is what I was referring to earlier. These energy projects, they ultimately will deliver a lot of income, and they also are amazing in delivering carbon reduction, but they are unbelievably complicated. We are seeing how digging a line to connect electricity line is just again and again things that you don't expect to come up. This is a reality of the complicated nature of changing energy, and no one could have foreseen it. And I believe these projects are being managed extremely well. There is an enormous amount of scrutiny as is taking place at the Green Investment and Utilities Group. Yeah, it is just incredibly difficult, but there is a lot of scrutiny and these costs are unavoidable.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cant.
Yes, Chair, thank you. We've mentioned these projects before. They have resulted in 2 deep dives into what has and hasn't gone wrong. And one of the results of that deep dive has been a restructure of the entire directorate that's been dealing with the capital projects and the way that they're handled. So considering that that is internal to the County Council, I think it speaks for itself.
It certainly does, Councillor Count, because the risks that we have inherited have been manifold. Thank you very much. Any other speakers? No, I'm not seeing any other speakers. So we are recommended to review and comment on the report. I believe we have done that. To what effect, I'm not sure, but we have done that. So thank you very much indeed. And then we will move on to item 7, which is the committee agenda plan, training plan, appointments to outside bodies and internal advisory groups and panels, and the appointment of member champions. So I'm going to ask the Democratic Services Officer to update us on any changes to the published report.
Thank you, Chair. There are no updates to report.
Thank you very much indeed. We are invited to note the agenda plan. Do we note the agenda plan? Thank you very much indeed. So we have not had any matters requiring us to move into confidential session. So we have now completed the final item on today's agenda. Our next meeting is on the 28th of November at 10 a.m. and I therefore declare this meeting closed. Thank you very much indeed.